Hey there, deep divers. Ready to dive deep. Today we're tackling something I know a lot of you have been requesting, Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
A classic for a reason.
It really is, and we're going beyond those quick fix promises you see everywhere else to get to the core of what Covey's talking about.
Right, it's more than just a self-help book. Covey's framework is about lasting change, and that starts with understanding how we see the world, those paradigms he talks about.
Yeah, those paradigms, they're like having the wrong map. You can keep driving, but if the map's leading you to the wrong place.
You'll never get where you need to be. And Covey argues a lot of us are operating with those outdated maps in our lives at work, in our relationships, everywhere. We try to change our actions, but it's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone.
I've got to fix what's underneath first, right?
Exactly. Address those underlying paradigms. Covey talks about the character ethic, the idea that effectiveness comes from aligning ourselves with principles, not just chasing quick fixes.
It's about getting to the root of how we operate, not just trimming the leaves, so to speak.
Exactly. And he illustrates this beautifully with a story about his own son who was struggling in school.
Oh, I remember that one. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking positive thinking will solve everything.
Right. But Covey realized that wasn't enough. They had to go deeper, examine their own paradigms about their son's capabilities.
So it's not just about plastering on a smile and hoping for the best. It's about the deeper work.
Yes, changing those deep-seated beliefs that might be holding us back.
Okay, so how do we even begin to uncover those hidden paradigms, those mental maps we might not even know we're using?
Well, Covey uses this great analogy, the goose and the golden egg. The goose, that's our ability to produce results.
Our capacity.
Yes, our production capability, PC. And the golden eggs, well, those are the actual results, the production, or P.
And we often get so focused on the eggs, the immediate outcomes, that we forget about the goose.
Yes. And we've all seen what happens when you get too focused on the golden eggs and not the goose.
It's like that story of the farmer who gets greedy and kills the goose thinking he'll get all the eggs at once.
Exactly. And then, of course, there are no more eggs. We see this all the time, don't we? Like someone who pushes themselves to get that promotion but ends up burnt out.
Or in relationships where someone's so focused on getting their needs met that they forget about their partner.
It might work in the short term, but eventually that well runs dry.
So how do we shift from that short-sighted perspective? How do we start taking care of the goose?
That's where Covey's first habit comes in. Be proactive.
Okay, being proactive. It sounds simple enough, but what does that look like in our everyday lives?
It's about recognizing that we have a choice. We have a choice in how we respond to the world around us. He talks about the circle of concern, all the things we worry about, but often can't control.
I think we all know that circle a little too well.
Right. But then there's this circle of influence, the things we can impact through our choices, our actions. And proactive people, they focus their energy there.
So it's not about ignoring problems, it's about focusing on what we can do.
Exactly. It's about directing our energy towards solutions.
Taking ownership of our experience.
Think about a time you felt really stuck. Were you in your circle of concern or your circle of influence?
That's a good question. I know I've definitely spent too much time in the if-onlys instead of focusing on what I could change.
We've all been there. And that's where that shift to proactivity comes in. Ask yourself, what's one small step I can take that's within my control?
So instead of being reactive, we become the authors of our own lives, even in small ways.
Exactly. And once you start to see those small wins, it builds momentum.
You start to prove to yourself that you do have agency, even when life gets messy.
And that sense of agency, well, that sets the stage for Covey's second habit, begin with the end in mind. But we'll save that for next time.
Welcome back, deep divers. Last time we were talking about being proactive.
Right, that ability to shift from feeling like life is happening to us to realizing, hey, we actually have power.
We can shape our experience.
And that leads perfectly into habit 2, begin with the end in mind.
Which I'll admit, when I first heard it,
It does sound,
it does sound a bit,
I don't know.
a little corporate-y.
Yeah. Like, what's my mission statement?
Right, but it's so much deeper than that. Think of it like, building a house. You wouldn't just start building without a plan, right?
You'd end up with a disaster.
Exactly. Chaos.
Yeah.
Wasted resources. And a house that's probably not going to stand the test of time.
Or a house that doesn't even look like what you wanted.
Exactly. And Covey's point is, we do this with our lives. We just drift from one thing to the next, reacting to everything around us instead of having a clear vision.
So habit 2, it's like creating that blueprint, but instead of, walls and a roof.
It's your values, your goals, what you want to be remembered for, what impact do you want to make.
Okay, those are some big questions. How do we even begin to answer those?
Covey suggests starting with a personal mission statement.
Okay, so really, it is about defining those core values, like what truly matters to us. Exactly. What are your non-negotiables? Is it integrity,
Yeah.
kindness, creativity?
And once you know those values, you can start to see how they impact everything. Like if we're not clear on our values, we end up saying yes to things that...
That don't really resonate with who you are.
Exactly. And then we wonder why we're feeling so burnt out.
It's like you're using the wrong map and you have no idea where you're even going. But
Yeah.
when your actions line up with your values, it's like you tap into this wellspring of energy.
You've got that inner guidance.
Exactly.
But even with the best compass, we still have to navigate the terrain, right? And I think that's where habit 3 comes in. Put first things first.
You got it. You can have the best blueprint in the world, but if you don't actually do anything...
It's just a piece of paper.
Exactly. Habit 3 is where the rubber meets the road.
And this is where things get really tricky for a lot of us, right? Because it's so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day, the urgent demands.
And we lose sight of those bigger goals.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier.
And Covey knew this was a struggle. That's why he introduced this time management matrix.
Ah, yes, the 4 quadrants.
It's famous for a reason. It's incredibly practical. It helps you categorize your tasks based on 2 things: urgency and importance. So you got quadrant I, right? The urgent and important tasks.
Those deadlines, the fires you've got to put out.
Exactly. Then there's quadrant 2, and this is the quadrant where Covey wants us to live as much as possible. These are the things that are important, but not urgent.
The things that often get pushed to the side when we're just, trying to survive the day.
Exactly. Things like planning, building relationships, developing skills.
And those are the things that make such a difference in the long run.
They do. But we neglect them, and then what happens? We end up with more of those quadrant I crises. We're so busy putting out fires that we don't prevent them.
Right, we're not thinking ahead.
Exactly.
So how do we escape that cycle? How do we prioritize quadrant 2 when it feels like quadrant I is taking over our lives?
It takes effort. I'm not going to lie. It's about being proactive, but with your schedule, blocking out time for those important but not urgent tasks.
So it's like treating those quadrant 2 activities like...
sacred.
Yes, like sacred appointments with ourselves, not just optional things we squeeze in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because they are important. They're investments in your future, in your well-being, in your ability to achieve those goals.
It's like we talked about with those emotional bank accounts, right? Putting in the time for those things, for ourselves, for the important people in our lives.
Those are all deposits.
And just like with our finances, if we're not making deposits...
You're going to end up overdrawn, emotionally bankrupt.
Exactly. We do it with our time, our energy, our relationships. And then, of course, we wonder why we feel so exhausted.
Exactly. Habit 3 is about recognizing that your time and energy, those are your most valuable resources.
And we get to choose how we invest them.
It's not just time management, it's life management.
Living intentionally, making choices, creating a life that feels meaningful.
Exactly. And that takes us to this really crucial point in Covey's framework: the shift from independence to interdependence.
Okay, so we're moving from me to we now.
Exactly. And this is where things get even more interesting. It is. And this is where things get really interesting. Because we were talking about, moving from independence to interdependence, and you can't have one without the other.
Right. It's like we were saying, you have to master that independence first.
It's like trying to build a house on a foundation of sand. You need that solid ground.
So those first 3 habits, proactivity, beginning with the end in mind, putting first things first, those are all about building that strong sense of self.
Exactly, that inner compass.
So that we can navigate relationships honestly.
With integrity. Otherwise, we end up in these codependent patterns looking for validation from outside instead of
trusting ourselves.
Exactly. And that's why Covey calls habits 4, 5, and 6, these are the public victory habits.
Public victory.
They're about succeeding with others, creating those win-win situations.
Okay, so win-win. It sounds great in theory.
Right.
But in reality, it can be tough.
It can. Especially when you're dealing with people who are stuck in that if I win, you lose kind of thinking.
Right, exactly.
But Covey says, shifting to a win-win paradigm, it requires a real change in mindset.
What do you mean?
It's about moving from that scarcity mentality, that there's not enough to go around.
Oh, I know that one.
To an abundance mentality.
Abundance mentality. What's that look like in practice?
believing that there's enough success, enough joy, enough opportunity out there for everyone.
Even when it feels like, a competition.
Especially then.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that your worth, it doesn't depend on someone else's failure.
Yeah.
You can celebrate other people's wins.
See them as inspiration.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about looking at challenges and thinking, how can we collaborate here? Not, how can I come out on top?
I love that. So instead of a competition, it's more like
A team effort. Exactly. And you start to see those third alternatives Covey talks about. But it takes a willingness to really listen to the other person.
understand where they're coming from.
And that brings us to habit 5, which might be the most important principle in any relationship. Seek first to understand, then to be understood.
I struggle with this one. I jump in with solutions before.
Before you fully understand the problem.
Yeah.
We all do it. Covey says that most people, they don't listen to understand, they listen to reply. We're so busy thinking about what we're going to say next.
That we miss what the other person is really saying.
Yes, and true understanding, it takes empathy. Putting your own agenda aside and really stepping into the other person's shoes.
Asking questions. Validating how they're feeling.
Exactly. You create that safe space for real dialogue.
And that safe space, that's what allows habit 6, synergize, to happen.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Synergy is that magic that happens when you bring different perspectives together.
It's like that saying.
2 heads are better than 1.
Yes, but with synergy, it's not just about having extra heads. It's about being open to those different perspectives.
Right. And being willing to challenge each other constructively.
So you can build on each other's ideas.
Exactly. Covey talks about brainstorming, where everyone feels safe to share those wild ideas.
Because you never know where that spark of brilliance is going to come from.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that kind of synergy, it takes trust, respect.
And that's why all those previous habits are so important.
They're the foundation.
We've got to be proactive. We've got to be clear about what we want.
Manage our time and energy effectively.
Build those strong relationships.
Like building a pyramid, right?
Each block builds in the one before it, and you end up with something incredible.
And that takes us to Covey's final habit. Habit 7, sharpen the saw.
Sharpen the saw. I love this one.
That's a good one, right? Because even the best tools, if you don't take care of them...
They get dull. Useless.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Covey say, we're the same way. We've got to take care of ourselves physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, if we want to be effective in the world.
So it's about exercise, nutrition, sleep.
Absolutely.
It's about feeding our mind.
Reading, learning.
And tending to our emotional well-being.
Yes. Self-care, healthy boundaries.
Connecting to something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah. Beautifully said. It's about that holistic approach, taking care of the whole person.
And that's what makes this framework so powerful, right? It's not just about achieving things. It's about...
Becoming the best version of yourself.
Exactly. And that's a journey, isn't it?
It is. Covey calls it the upward spiral.
The upward spiral. What does that mean?
We learn, we grow, we make mistakes, we learn from those mistakes, and we do it all again. But each time, we're at a higher level.
It's like that continuous process of becoming.
Exactly.
And what fuels that upward spiral, that journey?
Your own internal compass. What Covey calls your conscience. That's what guides you toward your highest potential.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into the 7 habits, I want everyone listening to remember this. You are the author of your own life.
You have the power to choose.
Design your destiny.
Make a difference.
It's all there for you.
Keep sharpening that saw.
And until next time, deep divers, keep exploring, keep growing. We'll see you next time.